Colonialism outposts were introduced to us 3 years ago now, and there are quite a few different features in Star Citizen that take a long time. We get updates on updates on updates, generally over the course of months, maybe over the course of a year or two. With Colonialism Outposts, it's been 3 years now, and we still don't see them. Now, they were originally planned for Pyro, but they've been talked about so much. I figured we have a little bit of a sit down here and go through every single update we've ever gotten on these outposts to see what the plan and ideas were behind them and where they are now. Right off the bat, we're going to go and look at the initial the initial introduction of this feature of the outposts. This is the very first time we ever heard or saw about them. And we're going to go all the way from this, which is summer of 2020, up until a couple of months ago when we got our last update on this.
Returning down planetside, early concept explorations are underway on the creation of homesteads, habitats and homes for NPCs that may one day dot across the surface of planets and moons throughout the Stanton system and beyond. Now, these thumbnail sketches are an invaluable first step in any concept process, and as usual, they're explorations only. That means that while several of them may be chosen to make the next step into full-on development, the reality is that many of these may die here as solid examples of simply what we don't want to do. Such is the way for thumbnail sketches.
So they actually used to call them homesteads. And they kind of like had the colonialism, what's it called? Little subcategory there. An important picture that's going to help with this. First thing to understand about Star Citizen is that there's a lot of detail. And one of the things that they added a lot of detail to was the art style, the architectural style of the game. So we already know utilitarian style in this game. Arcorp, Hurston, they're both very utilitarian in style. Even a lot of the space stations that we use are utilitarian. Doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense since the utilitarian era, as you can see here, was 800 years ago, as per the lore. But obviously, you know, you can make something in classical style right now. It's not like that just, there's rules that say you can't. So we've seen utilitarian style. We've also seen some high-tech style with microtech. So microtech sits in the high-tech architectural style. But besides that, we haven't seen anything else. We haven't seen streamline, we haven't seen metaclassicism, we haven't seen Henoism, and we haven't seen super modernism. The next thing we're supposed to be seeing is colonialism. This was during an era that humanity was spreading out. We were finding a bunch of planets, new systems, and we were building things with the frontier vibe. Using natural resources, using whatever was on hand on the planet, the stones and the minerals and that kind of stuff. And a lot of derelict stuff is also in the colonialism style, which we've seen popping up in Stanton a little bit. So this is meant to explain the architectural style of Star Citizen. I don't know how closely they're going to try and stick to this because things are always changing in the game, but this is something they presented to us back in 2019. And for the most part, they seem to be wanting, I mean, really, we don't have much of an example, but the colonialism style is starting with these outposts. I don't think it's ending with those outposts. I think we'll see all of these different archetypes of locations that we have, from outpost to city to space station, in all of these formats. In fact, you can see, let's see, what is it? I think it's Henoism. You can see the different art styles and some of the concept art for these planets. So if you go to Cascom in the Castra system, you can tell that it's very Henoistic. It was a former military base. It is not necessarily meant to be pretty. It's got kind of that bunker style. It's very heavily protected. So they have the plans for this kind of stuff. In fact, you can go to Castle in the Goss system and see that sort of super modern take on the designs as well. Very curved, very futuristic. So these are just kind of the different vibes and archetypes that they have in Star Citizen they want to do. And what we're going to go over today is their first explorations of the colonialism style. So I just showed you their introduction, summer 2020, very short. They just showed us a couple of these sketches. They are very Tatooine in style, I think people like to say. But that was our first update. Remember, 3 years ago, August of 2020. So now we're going to march our way through every other update and see what they've been saying about them. September 18th, let's see what they were saying about them then.
And persistent universe. Finally, several weeks ago, we showcased some initial concept explorations for homesteads, frontier housing to be found out in the wilderness area.
Honestly, I really like
for homesteads.
Really like this one. I hope we could see something like this in the game. This looks cool. This kind of reminds me of the Mass Effect 1 outposts you'd get when you go down to a planet and explore a little bit.
So the next step has been to turn some of those 2D sketches that we really liked into 3D sketches in Blender to further explore the shape language, to see these things from as many different angles as possible.
Looks like a stovetop, little cooker here.
And to begin to build out a library of kit bash options for us to play with.
There were a couple things that showed up while he was talking, and he mentioned the resource generation. So you see like power cells down here, you see solar panels, gas and liquid storage, you see cooling units. All of these things are it's the kind of stuff they built into the concept, because you know at some point this stuff is going to act with engineering gameplay, with powering locations and figuring out the resource management of each of these outposts. That's going to allow us to do maybe some small missions on these locations. I mean, imagine being able to have these as locations for your org to have on different planets, where you're farming resources and then sending them on cargo trips back to your main location. So much logistics opportunity with this kind of stuff. But right now what we're looking at is strictly for NPCs. Base building for us is going to be a far ways away. But as we continue through these updates, you will notice some of the tools that they use to build this stuff are derivatives of the tools that we'll be using when the game gets to that point. So the next update we got on these outposts was about 2 months later. So we went from August, September, now we are here in November.
Finally, let's check in once again with the ongoing work of our colonial-style homesteads.
No, Sredna.
Last time, we saw the 2D concepts turned into 3D concepts. And that was a big step in helping us visualize and evaluate the direction we wanted to take them.
So this is going from like he just said, they wrote it down on paper, and then they made those in Blender, and now they've got some kind of concept going on.
What you're seeing here is the next step in that look dev process, where we've now taken the raw, very rough 3D concept meshes and brought them down to a planet in Engine, similar to the way the team reviewed 3D docking concepts by sticking them onto existing space stations.
See, these kind of updates can be a little bit misleading, because these are 3D sketches as opposed to being actual in-game objects, you know? You gotta pay a lot of attention to what they specifically are saying when they show this stuff.
Now, it's important to note here that these are still concepts, and that the process of building them into viable in-game assets has not yet begun. So let's set our expectations accordingly.
From there, we moved on to January of 2021. Now, during this time, we actually were getting some updates in monthly reports, so it's not like we were completely out of the loop when we weren't getting these video updates. But as you can see, compared to what we're seeing right now, they were giving us way more updates on these outposts back then when they first started. These little yellow labeled interactive points you can see are, they're planned in here. So you got fuses, as we've heard with the engineering gameplay. You've got a multifunction display, which obviously controls this cooling tower. These are going to be objects that can be interacted with and used on missions, in activities, even in some kind of maybe like training scenarios. Everything has been planned from the start for these outposts to be pretty heavily interactable.
And once again with the team working on colonialism-style homesteads. And we have some additional concepting for a variety of add-ons to be found throughout the various encampments, like these cooling stations for enormous server racks.
Again, you can see more interactive points here.
Solar array add-ons for both the power plants we saw before and habitat buildings themselves.
Definitely going to be using solar arrays. That makes sense.
Refinery units.
This is something that we will actually see in the white box phase later in one of these updates. So they've taken this from the concept phase and started to put it in game already. Actually, we've seen these like final art complete in some videos.
And finally, potential blockouts for combining many of those aspects into outdoor storage yards that will form the basis for a wide variety of NPC and player experiences in the future.
This is the very first time we ever saw their base building tool, and it looks awful. Very, very, very early. Over the time as we watch these, you will see how this interface improves as well, but they had a big problem with planets before, where every single time there was a planet, there was an update in the game, the planetary tech, because it wasn't complete, would update the terrain. So they couldn't put outposts on the planets because they would just, if they didn't update, the outpost would suddenly be underground. They also couldn't do it because they couldn't change terrain, but that's a different problem. This is something that only started to become a reality when the planetary tech team started to finish their work, which obviously took like 4 years since they started in 2015. They kind of finalized and launched their first version in like 2020, 2021. So you want to do base building, you want to do these small points of interest, but at the same time, it's hard to test them in a live environment when that live environment deletes them every time you do. So you can kind of see how one feature taking a long time made it so that other features that depended on that took even longer. So it's a bummer, but it happens quite a bit in some of Star Citizen stuff.
These homesteads will begin being integrated into the persistent universe in the coming months.
Starting to kind of tease the base building, still looking at these concepts of locations and assets and props and stuff, but we're getting more of a sense of the interactability that they want to provide and an idea of what these outposts will actually be. Jumping forward just a month, they get, for the first time, they start showing us the interior, the details of these places.
As work on the colonialism-style homesteads continues, the props team, hungry to join the fight, has jumped in with a variety of food-related items designed to populate one of the principal social areas found within. Now, social areas like this will be
There were no tomatoes here. What is wrong with you people? They got like goop, but no tomatoes.
Social areas found
Shame.
within. Now, social areas
thanks for the
like
bits.
this will be essential to making the NPC settlements found throughout the persistent universe feel simultaneously alive and lived in, while also serving as potential mission hubs, drop-off points, and general meeting areas for players. They also broke out into the world of chairs.
Chairs! That was a pretty small update, more on the props and stuff, but still, again, every single month they were giving us some kind of a video update. All right, so here is another update on our colonialism outpost. Looks like they are transitioning into white box. So this is February of 2021.
Looking a bit farther ahead, whiteboxing continues of several of the colonialism outpost buildings we've seen concepted over the last several months, using the idea of a small home as their starting point. You can see things like the standalone battery pack, the rooftop solar panel.
Again, these are some of those interactable components that I think we're going to depend on for resource management, but you can see they are consistently highlighting.
And life support units. They've also begun to box out the small garage unit that can comfortably fit an Ursa rover, as well as a ladder up to the roof because we're always thinking about advanced traversal options, as well as some tests using the recently revealed terrain modification tool to see how the overall buildings work with the smoothing volumes. Outside, pre-production has begun on materials explorations and defining exactly how these structures are constructed in the lore of our universe, from the foundation stones at the bottom and up through the various paint layers, to exploring new types of hard surfaces for the interior edge wear effects, which are designed to remove sharp corners from every surface.
This stuff is already looking really good back then.
Kind of building for Star Citizen, so the team is having a lot of fun exploring a more organic looking structure all around.
Materials and stuff started to update. They got it into white box. It was actually in-game, or not in-game, but in-engine in some way. Jumping forward again, just another month, not even another month, 2 weeks to March 12th. These models were getting a lot more solidified in the game engine.
Now, it wouldn't be a sprint report these days without a continuing look at the progress of our colonialism outposts. So here's a look at further Whitebox progress. Most of the work this sprint was in determining all the things Whitebox is normally used for, such as working out how all the various modules will connect and function with one another, figuring out how to set up the necessary
Now remember what this looks like, because we're going to see this completely finished in an actual gameplay scenario in a little bit.
viz areas while adapting for the sloped exterior walls, continuing to work out all the necessary runtime environment probes needed to allow lighting from the exterior to creep in through the windows to the interior, and potentially the other way around as well. Basically, it's work preserving the necessary modularity so that these outposts can work in multiple configurations, while adapting the blend tech to properly allow for spill into each room without noticeable lines everywhere. Ultimately, it's just nice to follow along with the continued progress of these outposts that'll first be used in NPC settlements across Stanton and Pyro, and then eventually be rolled out to player use after that.
Again, white box updates, nothing too crazy, but it's nice to see that they've got the spacing figured out. So another update came in from them on April 23rd, 2021. Again, another month in between updates. They were just on it with this.
It wouldn't be a sprint report without a look at the continuing progress of our colonialism outposts being worked on for Pyro and other frontier systems. Now this week, the props team has begun whiteboxing out some of the various accoutrements that may one day fill the interior spaces. Things like beds, rugs that will eventually get some nice physicalized deformation so they really tie the rooms together, all manner of lamps, drapes that can hang in front of windows and diffuse the runtime lighting in new and exciting ways, and some righteous pottery to unchain the melodies of our hearts.
This looks like a roll of toilet paper, which, you know, is okay. We need that there. So this is just more prop work, but they are getting more detailed with it.
So they really tie the rooms together.
Like this stuff was before we were just looking at kind of like the walls and things, and now they're starting to look at more of the furniture and the details of the outposts. So they did some good work on this over that first year after they introduced it. And this is another update jumping to the next month in May.
Now, it's been a month since we last looked in on the continuing work building our upcoming colonialism homesteads. I know, I couldn't believe it either. As for the homesteads themselves, they're working their way through Greybox now. So let's take a look inside at this internal review that was done just a couple weeks ago.
So this is way more detailed, huh?
As for the homesteads themselves...
Remember, we just saw this in that really, really undetailed white box with all the gray, not detail-y stuff going on. Yeah, this is like the exact same spot that we saw here, right? That's the same room. So that's kind of a good look at the difference between white box, which is this. Blow this up a little bit. This is white box, and then this is gray box of the exact same place. Different lighting, better prop placement. Everything looks a little bit more detailed and textured. Just as an example. Oh, they haven't even started putting NPCs in at this point. You will see this same exact place with actual NPCs and stuff in it in a little bit. Okay, this is a very, very quick little update I thought was interesting for us to put in here. This is just a quick comment from Jared talking about these colonialism outposts that I thought would be interesting to include just because he says something a little interesting here.
I was literally just having a conversation with somebody the other day about the colonialism stuff because we were showcasing it quite regularly on our sprint reports, and then we're holding back now because you might see it in somewhere else soon that's really obvious and coming up.
It was, again, a little teaser about Pyro, but this was 2 months before we got this. This is kind of them talking more in detail about what their plans are for this, and just in general, this was CitizenCon from 2021, so a lot of you might remember this, but there's a lot of good info in here as to like what their thinking is and what direction they want to go in here.
When we started looking at outposts and started really from a ground up on how to make it so that there's more diverse gameplay in there, The player can approach it in multiple different routes. There can be combat encounters. There can be social encounters. So we needed to kind of rebuild and rethink the way that we were doing this. We started honing in on what was working, what wasn't working, and then did a lot of adjustments.
We've had outposts in our game for some time. You know, when we started to hear from an art side for what the design requirements were going to be, fundamentally thinking about these as modules, thinking about them as thematic modules and, you know, very specific, then, you know, already like the mind was going of like, okay, we're going to need a kind of like a paradigm shift in terms of how we visually present these. You know, what could these settlements...
Come on, like, look at that. You know exactly what they were going for with that shot.
In terms of how we visually present these. You know, what could these settlements kind of feel like? And, you know, as with everything with outposts, it's you know, it's a gameplay or it's a location archetype. It's the smallest, probably one of the smallest location archetypes.
Okay, this is a super important line. There are actually a lot of questions about like, hey, these outposts are kind of small, they're cool, but can we use something that's a little bit more town or village sized? And he addresses that directly here.
Or it's a location archetype. It's the smallest, probably one of the smallest location archetypes that we have. And then in time that will lead to like, you know, villages and towns. And
yeah. How would this expand? How would the players be able to make these homes feel, you know, homes or outposts or even businesses feel unique for the way that they want to play? And then there were even tools that we had to create in order to actually be able to embed these into the ground and make sure that it worked much better than what we did in Stanton, because with those we had to have them kind of on stilts and you know, just the points of contact were very limited for the ground.
Right. Fundamentally, the thing that probably got us the most excited is finally we've started to think about these as like unified settlements, you know, base building. So as you can see on some of the concepts, we deliberately presented early exploration shots in this kind of like semi-isometric view to see, you know, how does it feel if I'm laying out my base? How would these modules kind of, you know, tie together? And you know, it kind of got the team excited. And finally, we were thinking, all right, these settlements are going to be more than just, you know, like a single outpost, but more like a collection of modules.
All right, so let's look at the exterior concept development, what they've talked about here.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the colonialism, and now I'm going to show you a little bit more about the modules.
Oh, they're still building the game engine, yeah.
What we did was creating all the primitives and all the primitive shapes into 3D. So as you can see here, we have a lot of variety, right? There's the cubic coming in, there's the cylinder coming in, the spheres coming in. For example, if I take this building over here and I duplicate it and move it around, I could just simply grab some of the other ones and combine them together. And you will see later on that this is one of our archetypes, or one that we pretty much liked, right? What you can see here is the very first concepts for the solar panels, for example, or the top-mounted, the roof-mounted solar panels. In the background, you see some other nice details that we can then just pick and put on our buildings, right? And some of the very last that we did is then pretty much those. So those were one of the archetypes. And you see there are small buildings for housing or housing buildings. There are some building types that are more communal. We have some secondary and tertiary buildings.
890 jump building confirmed. Doesn't look big enough though.
It's like those radio towers. If you imagine you're a
farming
colonist on a planet, right? On
the greenhouse.
There are multiple settlements on a planet. How would they communicate with each other? So we have kind of a radio tower. This was just one of the very many files that we created. So those are mostly buildings, but
this thing right here. We're gonna see this in game in a little bit.
Different files for assets and props and how they would fit inside this main architectural style that we wanted to see more involved, right? So just a very early version of the refinery, for example. But all of this in the end was given us the opportunity to just cherry pick the best ideas that we felt appropriate for this specific colonialism style, right? And where other people were able then to just grab the best parts and then use it in the actual game engine.
Now we're going to do the same thing for interiors.
We knew there was a few key areas that we needed to design. First, it was the social space. You know, this is basically these kind of communal hubs. We knew we wanted like that open kitchen, seating areas.
Honestly, I could just like look at these people's art stations for hours. There's so much going on here. There's so much to like drink in, and it's still such a kind of like a rough sketch. Like you can tell the lines aren't necessarily picked out. But I love the vibe that you get from these colonialism outposts. It's just so much different from what we have in Stanton, which is really cool.
An area where people could kind of hang out and, you know, relax. And then second to that was habitation. You know, we knew these are going to need to be abodes. We knew we needed
Stanco.
bathrooms, hab units. But again, nothing in here would be, you know, pre-manufactured. So we wanted actual beds.
Did that say interaction point on the toilet? Oh, it's just the button to flush. The detail.
You know, pre-manufactured. So we wanted actual beds, not racks of beds. So everything about this process was about, you know, creating a design which you would look at and relate to and think, oh, I could see myself living there. I could see someone living there for quite a long period of time. The last major visual archetype was engineering. So these are the type of spaces. It could be a power room or an engine room, or some areas if your armor got beat up, you could, you know, repair your armor in there. Basically, it's a language which will enable us to create a variety of like engineering type spaces. And then once we'd established a spread of visual archetypes, we knew that they were all working well together. We could take that as a format and then start to think more about actual themes that we wanted in these outposts. Basically, when we was doing the design process, we pretty much focused on independent, mainly because that was our baseline. It was very easy to kind of design these and visually design these spaces is it like an independent farmer, or is it an independent miner? And then with that, we wanted to really create an experience where you walked into one of these outposts and it feels old. It feels relatable, but it doesn't feel recognizable.
We haven't seen so much of this. We're going to see a lot of concept art during this video of different sort of overlays of these outposts. We've seen almost none of these. You guys will see this in game in a little bit here. It's just crazy how much potential there is with this stuff. And as Space Cadet's saying in chat, obviously it's taken a long time for them to build this stuff. We're going to see in monthly reports in a little bit here that even after all of this work has happened, just now, starting in the last like 6 to 7 months, they're finally getting the lighting team to get in there and finally, you know, bring in the last little bits of polish that they need for the locations to go live. That's, you know, lighting, VFX, audio stuff. So I'm really excited to see how they scale these out. But ultimately, the best part of this is that they are building so many sets. They call them, I think, content packs or something like that, where they just have a massive amount of variety of these things, and they can start throwing them on planets in huge numbers with different sort of modularity and designs. It's going to be like nothing we've seen in Stanton. Because again, Stanton always had that problem of planets were always changing. That's why all of the outposts are on stilts. Because they couldn't even have the outpost sitting on the ground because of how the ground would change. Somebody pointed it out in chat earlier. You still see rocks floating in the air. So Stanton is nowhere near the experimental phase of Pyro and what we're going to see from these Pyro locations. And that's just the second system. What happens is we go to Nyx and Terra and build in new architectural styles and actually have AI and NPCs mattering here and have missions and stuff we can do at these locations. It's very fun. But like a lot of Star Citizen, it's the potential, you know?
Now that we've shown a lot of art and talked a lot of theory, we want to get into game and show off what we've been working on.
Here you can see like various outpost modules. You know, to the right there, we've got the garage unit. You can see the infrastructure on the roof. But this large, beautiful, archway here kind of signifies, the main entrance, the primary entrance to the main social module. I think it absolutely looks fantastic. The radial forms, is quite special to this art style, and you can see how that complements these archways that lead into other areas of the outpost.
So here the player will make their way out to the trading post, go see the dealer, acquire the artifacts.
And for the trading post, we wanted to get all of the junk on the outside as well, so the player can see it as they're approaching. We wanted, as many tops as we could, and you can see it's using the new soft deck shader. So these are reacting to the planetary wind, the same force that the tall grass and the moss on the ground is reacting to as well.
Which is sort of, if you're familiar with the lore of Hades, was an old civilization that destroyed itself. So somehow this trader has gotten their hands on this artifact.
Now, this is, I think, a little bit more of an interesting scenario because it does show you more of what these outposts are made of, which is why we're here.
AI and see how they want to approach the problem and see what other secondary or tertiary routes would be open to them, either via the ladder or maybe a possible door.
Also, what we're seeing here is like something to imply at the frontier living, maybe the growing crops or vegetables out here, but it also gives a kind of like a soft cover approach to the perimeter of the base.
So here, the player will take a secondary route of navigation all the way up to the roof. So it allows the player to interact with different items and then basically...
So there's those, you can notice all these solar panels, wiring, lights. This is all that resource management stuff they were highlighting before that will probably interact with these outposts. And he gets up here next to it,
for them to play in.
and you can see it's got that little power box right here. So there's some obvious access points and interactive points that might, work into more missions than just go here and shoot people or trade things, but actually repair this thing or get this town back online or reestablish communications kind of stuff. Could be those little tiny extra missions that you get from a bartender or something that they're not that important, but they give you something to do at these locations.
Allows them to go and access new areas. It's a behavior that we're still working out, but at least we're seeing like the first iterations and be able to continue to optimize it as well as make sure that the behavior is working properly.
So we just saw that for the first time. It's like the first rooftop airlock hatch. So previously, route in and out, if the outside wasn't pressurized, we wouldn't have this option. But now through that rooftop airlock, you can cycle and then infiltrate through the roof. And also what we're seeing here is potentially scouting out an advanced traversal up into the rafters, getting on top of some infrastructure and getting like this overview as we go into the garage module. So here, previously the players being, on the roof, they've come down through the main section of the outpost. But here, what the players doing is they're going to the underfloor section. So these are vents, but they're more like subfloors. So they're meant to feel very dark, very minimal, but you're actually seeing the foundations of these outposts. So inside here, it's the player will need to kind of work out how to navigate through them. It's very much a torch-based experience, and then within here, what the player can actually do is work out roughly where they are in relation to what's upstairs. And what you're seeing here, like this light bleeding down through, you can kind of make informed decisions, or okay, that's where that AI was, or right now the player is just underneath that main social space. So if you think back, that was that guard in the beginning, just next to the kitchen counter.
So that's all they had to say about Outposts there. As you can see, they made a lot of progress from 2020 till then. over the course of about a year and a half. But they weren't done. That was kind of, obviously they prettied that up. They got it ready for the demo. It wasn't ready to go into the full game at that point. So we got to start seeing some more mentions of the work that they were doing to build it up. So here is our first update in 2022 that we saw on these outposts.
Finally, let's take another look at the continuing development of colonialism outposts, including these new liquid storage tanks, some new light fixtures, wells, and new garden modules. You know it's the future because of hexagons.
Love hexagons.
Then, from one outpost type to another look at white box explorations of derelict outposts.
So the derelict outposts are actually a fun story. Those we got introduced in January of 2022, and they were put into the game, I think, by May of 2022, something like that. So they kind of they proved out that the sandbox team can build these locations quickly. It's just the colonialism outposts are definitely on the back burner waiting for Pyro to come in. But there are a lot of different archetypes, wells and farming and fuel, and we'll see here, I think, something on mining soon. So this is a refinery station, which this is just kind of the concept art for, but we have seen it in-game. So here's one shot of it from a recent ISC. And they just kind of sneak it in here in the background, but you can see it's at its final art. It's got its lighting. This stuff is like, I don't know, to some level, ready to go into the game. We've also got to look at some of the farming outpost types here. Here is another look at a refinery. You've got these cooling towers, and you can tell this is pretty obviously the same sort of thing as this. So all this stuff they've got like modeled out and they've been kind of teasing us with, but they haven't really dove into what it is yet. And here's a gray box version of that same thing. You can see the mining over here. The yellow highlights all the interactable points. But besides that, we didn't get too many other video updates for the colonialism style. They kind of went a little quiet with it last year, I think, because they realized they were going to be further away than they thought. But they have a little bit of a mention here. Work continued towards the final on the colonialism outpost, with more variants and modules being completed. In conjunction with the new Rastar tool gaining a wider feature set, the team began dedicating playtesting in the lead up to a wider distribution across the systems they'll first be seen in. Obviously not including Stanton. And then we got another month. So that was March monthly report of last year. This is the April monthly report of last year, where they say, elsewhere, the second round of content for the initial release of the new colonialism outposts is nearing final. The outposts will soon start to be distributed across the Pyro system in readiness for their debut. So they've already kind of started internally pushing these outposts out and making sure that they work with all the stuff they have planned. And you can see a picture, another picture here of it.
Now, one of last year's big showcases were the colonialism outposts. And in the time since then, they've grown and expanded several times in scope. And while we're not gonna spoil all of that here just yet,
so these, I think they call the Outlaw style of the same outposts we just saw. So they will have Outlaw style, they'll have corporate style, they'll have random civilian styles. It's just another feature set on top of them.
we can show you is what we call overlay work.
Overlay, yeah.
Overlays are essentially a collection of props and dressings that can be added to an object container of an existing location. In this case, several of the colonialism homestead modules, to give them a look and feel of something very different than their original intention. But you can see here the power of proper dressing in action all the same, and its ability to transform a location from cozy homestead to outlaw ruggedness. Now, tests like this are done to accomplish a few things. First and foremost, to validate what works and what still needs adjusting when these modular overlays are assembled in the variety of ways that will ultimately make up dozens and dozens of different layouts throughout the verse. It can also serve as identification of feature and UI needs for Rastar, the internal tool that designers are using to populate the entire Pyro system ahead of Alpha 4.0.
This person's not as bloodthirsty as whoever was playing that demo.
That the new overlay hasn't broken any of the existing quest work in place. that AI doesn't get stuck on a random box that wasn't there in the base module, and much, much more. And as work progresses, the Outlaw overlay will continue to be developed into smaller subsets, some generalized for use anywhere in the verse, and others specifically tailored to some of the many gangs found throughout the Pyro system.
This video is actually from 2022. This is from about a year ago.
I'll just say, some of this stuff is dark.
Ew. See, this is where I thought we were before when I saw those bodies hanging.
And just so you don't think they've only been working on the same stuff from last year, here's a sneak peek at early white box of a repair and service station you may encounter on your travels in Stanton.
This is cool. This gives me very Star Wars vibes of just like a single landing pad surrounded by a circular wall in the middle of the desert where you can land, get some repairs, maybe do some quick work, and then get out of there. I love that.
Pyro and beyond. Work is also underway creating various refineries and other producers that will make use of the upcoming resource management system to provide new opportunities for players to build their credit empire, or should they choose, hinder the advancement of someone else's.
I'm excited for that stuff. That's good stuff. Okay, so here is another update on these outposts. This was one, we're getting into like really recent time now. This is December of 2022. Now the lighting team is starting to focus more on the outpost, which is generally good news for these assets. Lighting comes pretty late when they finally got the designs and everything in place and set to go. So what they have to say here is they continued to improve all lighting aspects on the colonialism outposts. This involves a lot of interior and exterior work to ensure that they fit the environment and create the intended cold or cozy feeling within the buildings. All right, another update we got, this time in 2023. So we're getting real close to present day. And the lighting team, literally the only thing they worked on was the Lorville skyline rework, which they finished. So then they moved on to colonial outposts. This is a significant undertaking with many pieces that we need to get right, is all they said. Moving on to the next one, we've got March of 2023 monthly report here. So this is something that came out to us in April. And they said that the lighting team was working on Invictus Launch Week and Ruined Station. They also progressed with their work on the Colonial Outpost modules in development by the Sandbox 1 team. I can actually pull that up real quick so you guys see who that is. Here we go. Outpost, Homestead, Independent, and Outlaw. This is a Sandbox team working on a small home for AI to live in and shelter. They consist of a central hub and a few optional internal and external modules. They provide the basic necessities to support a small group of people for an indefinite amount of time. So, art and design, working on these, and they look like they are scheduled to finish up towards the end of this quarter. Or I guess quarter 3, but who knows. And then Outpost theme variants, those got a lot of work before too. So yeah, that's who's working on it right now. And here is one last update. This is the most recent update we've gotten on anything related to these outposts. This again is almost entirely focused on Stanton. So these aren't necessarily the colonialism outposts, but they will give you an idea of what they are thinking for outposts in general and how they want to have them function in game. Average size of the team seems like it's anywhere from 5 to 15 people, but
my third favorite settlement
that's really off the top of my head. Don't quote me on that.
would probably be the one beside the lake. It's a small settlement, as if like one person had a small little ship. He was by himself. They landed in the woods, but near enough to a little lake. And he's like, I'm going to make this little, almost like a fishing cabin on this side of the lake and live this super peaceful life. It has a few little tabs that are just like basically for shelter for like shaded areas where they maybe has a little workbench or a little table that they're making like crafting elements. He also built like a little dock so he can like maybe fish there at night. We planted a couple little harvestables as well along the coast of the water. The kit and all our object containers have been growing exponentially, which is making our work a lot faster. We're a bit more efficient, and we can use our Rastar tool to populate these settlements a lot quicker. We're building these kits as we go, so like every new settlement or every new theme that we find that we're missing little elements for like pathways, some visual keys that makes them a little bit more unique. As these settlements grow, we get to also share with the new settlements that come in, so we're able to do really small settlements, but also go into these really, really large settlements where It's almost like fortresses or small villages. But now we have some that are like fully fortified. We have added gameplay like where we can play King of the Hill. We got other ones with like turrets, defense walls, security gates, but everything's still in derelict kind of shape, a bit more like Mad Max, where it's not abandoned, but like they use ship parts, and these things are.
So this kind of derelict settlement still fits into that initial colonialism style. So if you look down here at the colonialism style, you'll see that derelict archetype is actually fitting in under there. It's one of the pillars. So frontier vibe, pyro. Derelict archetype is the colonialism style in Stanton.
These settlements that have been like there for like 100 years. Others that maybe the spaceship just crashed and like they just started building a village for the last couple of years. Some people would make something that's a bit more fortified to defend against nature and all the elements. Maybe some people would make like a bar just to invite their friends over, expecting to be rescued soon enough, I guess, or within the next several years. So we have like a bunch of farms, we have greenhouses, we can have like hostile, and we can have also just social settlements now with a lot more assets to play with. I could definitely see myself building a nice little town in there that's nice and protected. It has these little half barricaded walls made out of lumber, and it has all these drapes, these fabrics, these tarps that are playing in the wind. We have these old windmills that are in the background with fields of crops that they grew, but also it's a bit of like overgrown vegetation at the same time because it's not like lined up perfectly. It's just like this little savage garden that you can pick some berries.
Savage garden.
Or whatever. You have these big greenhouses during the winter season that you can actually grow stuff. You can also use these as harvestables. The player can go visit the greenhouses and just pick some things and add it to his inventory.
It's nice to see that going from all the way back here when they're talking about just like getting concepts together to all the way up here where they're getting rid of artists because they now have big enough repositories of this stuff, reading the monthly reports and seeing that like they've got these content packs that are going to include entire drops of these outposts, and being able to see those content packs on display in like these kinds of shots where they show us all of the stuff that they're creating. You get the sense that they've gotten a lot more scaled up with this stuff over the last few years. Still taking a while. It's still stuck with Pyro. Don't think they're going to really expand on Stanton outposts besides these derelict outposts we're seeing in derelict ships. But I like what they're doing. I think we still have some time to go before we get to finally see these in game. But I hope that was a good summary for you guys of the history of this feature. I think I'm going to start doing more and more of these about different features in the game. That is the plan going forward. So thank you all for coming. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our stream here today, but I hope you got some new news out of this, got to understand how they're moving forward with Outposts. I think these are going to be good little locations for small missions and mission givers and meetup locations whenever we finally want to start doing that kind of stuff. And yeah, thanks y'all.